Hi everyone. Valerie and I are on our annual break over the northern summer, and we'd hate for you to miss your weekly nerd out with us. So we visited the Nerd Vault and pulled out some of our favourite and I think most useful episodes. This week we explore archetypes and the adage, nothing new after Act 2. Now, I've used the concept of archetypes in my middle grade novel, Jet Cooper, that's being published in September. And I've used the hero archetype for my main character, Jet. He is driven and knows what he wants, but he's also young and doesn't fully comprehend the risks and consequences of his actions. Jet is so focused on what he wants, which is winning a scholarship to the Flying Academy, that he forgets about the people who care about him and also learning from those that can see the mistakes that he's making. But Jet, like most 14-year-olds, needs to learn by making his own mistakes. Now, if Jet doesn't apply the lessons that he learns and adapts, then he'll become the worst version of himself. And the worst version of a character or the hero is called the shadow. And in most stories where the characters change or there's an internal character arc, there is usually another character that represents the shadow. The shadow archetype, so the character who serves as a warning for Jet if he doesn't change, is Knox Martin. And Knox on the outside is charming, ambitious, and successful. Knox is one of Jet's father's students who was selected to compete in the World Aerobatic Racing Championships. So he is doing what Jet wants to do. And Jet desperately wants to do this. But Knox is manipulative and he'll do anything, and I mean anything, to win. So the role of archetypes became really obvious to me when I was close to writing the final draft of Jet Cooper back in 2024. And it became obvious as I was studying this for this season, so season 10 of the podcast. And it really helped me understand what characters are meant to do and how to apply nuances to the characters in my novel. So this study also helped Valerie and I understand the value of archetypes, and we've included a chapter about them in our Story Trinity course, which you can find at storynerd.ca/courses. Now, listening to our Moonstruck episode is a good way to see how archetypes are used to enhance storytelling. So revisiting this episode will also serve as a reminder of how to manage information as you write. So the adage, nothing new after Act 2, when unpacked, is more about looking at setups and payoffs in your story and seeing how they work. So without further ado, we'll jump into this excellent episode. If you want to write stories your readers will love, there are 3 things you need to do. Understand storytelling principles, see how other writers have applied those principles, and then use them in your own work. Here on the Story Nerd podcast, our goal is to demystify story theory. We'll help you with the first 2 steps so that you can get started with the third. I'm Melanie Hill, writer, editor, and poet, and I help writers who share my passion for fairy tales, spy stories, and master detective novels, and to help them plot and then write their stories.
And I'm Valerie Francis. I'm a writer and literary editor, and I teach women how stories work so they can finish their books faster and without the frustration.
On today's episode, Valerie pitched Moonstruck so that we can study setups and payoffs. This 1987 film was directed by Norman Jewson from a screenplay by John Patrick Shanley. Now, of course, there will be spoilers because we can't talk about the movie without talking about the movie. And please help other writers find our show by leaving a rating and review. For Apple Podcast listeners, you can do it right from your phone. Simply go to the show's landing page and scroll to the bottom. It's that simple. All right, Valerie, we're in a new season. So what have you got for us this season and this episode?
All right. Well, the theory that I am discussing this season is an axiom really that I learned from Steven Pressfield, and it goes like this: nothing new after Act Two. So when I first heard that, I thought, oh, hey, that's kind of neat. I can do that. But when I tried to apply it, I had all kinds of questions popping up in my head. So I had to go and study it. And I'm going to continue that study this season. So, for starters, my question was, what does Act Two mean? I mean, is that Act Two of a 3-act story or a 4-act story? Because in the first instance, the 3-act story, Act Two ends at about the 75% mark. But if the story is broken into 4 acts, then Act Two ends at about the 50% mark. Now, that's quite a difference. And then what about 1-act plays or a 5-act TV show? Like, what does Act Two mean? And then there's the question of nothing new. Well, what does that mean? It almost feels like, when you get married, something old, something new, something bored, something blue. Well, what does nothing new after Act Two mean? Is it nothing new about the characters? Nothing new about the plot? Nothing new about something else? I had no idea. When I actually tried to apply this, I didn't know what to do. Now, I have since discovered that Steven Pressfield was, in essence, talking about setups and payoffs. In the first half of a story, we need to have set up everything about the plot and the subplots, if there are any, and this includes objects of desire and stakes, by the way. And we need to have set up everything about the character arc so that in the second half of the story, we can start paying it all off. Now, that, in broad strokes, is the gist of what nothing new after Act Two means. I think of setups and payoffs as questions asked and answered. So you're posing questions in the beginning of your story and you're answering them at the end of your story. But Robert McKee puts it like this: to express our vision scene by scene, we crack open the surface of our fictional reality and send the audience back to gain insight. These insights, therefore, must be shaped into setups and payoffs. To set up means to layer in knowledge. To pay off means to close the gap by delivering that knowledge to the audience. When the gap between expectation and result propels the audience back through the story seeking answers, it can only find them if the writer has prepared or planted these insights in the work. And that comes from Story, from pages 238 and 239. All right, yeah, that's great and all. But again, what does it mean? I love McKee. It just takes me a while to understand him. All right. So over the course of this season, then, what I'm going to do is look at how writers set up stories and how they pay them off. Now, this is an area that's really worth taking the time to study and understand, because when you do start to understand it, suddenly this huge, monstrous task of writing a long form story becomes a lot less daunting. And that means it's worth it to me. Now, this is not to suggest that there is some kind of formula to follow or template or beat sheet that you can just simply fill in the boxes of and presto magico, you have your story. That's what AI is going to do. That's not what we're going to do because we're artists. But there is a way of telling a story so that it makes sense to your reader or your viewer, so that it captures the attention and the imagination of your reader or viewer. So, with that said, how is this axiom, nothing new after Act Two, how does that play out in Moonstruck? I chose this film because it's pretty straightforward. It's an 80s movie. So actually, when we started to watch it, or when I started to watch it, I kind of wondered what's going to happen now. Is my memory of this movie accurate? Because when we've done 80s movies in the past, they haven't aged so well. God love the 80s. But Moonstruck is a rom-com and it's straightforward. It's, an external genre story, the courtship love story. It's an arc plot form. It has a single protagonist and an entirely linear timeline. There's no flash forwards, there's no flashbacks. So when we're studying a principle like setups and payoffs, or any principle for that matter, it's easiest to see them in these kinds of stories that don't have a lot of bells and whistles. Now, I mean, you don't want to start with a Christopher Nolan film, even if he is your favorite filmmaker of all time, right? And you don't want to start with a sprawling epic like Game of Thrones because it's too big. It's too overwhelming. There's too many plot lines. There's too many characters. You would never be able to see the forest for the trees in something that big. Now, in saying that, I'm not suggesting that Moonstruck is somehow lesser as a story than the others. It's just that the form is cleaner, and so it's easier to identify this storytelling principle or any other one that you want to study. Alrighty, so Moonstruck is a story in 4 acts. Everything we need to know about the plot and the characters, we know by the halfway point. So Act 2 is Act 2 of a 4-act story. It's halfway, okay, roughly. There are 3 plot lines, and they are this. The first one, the main plot line, is the love triangle between Loretta, Johnny, and Ronnie. It's a courtship love story. Then the second plot line, it's a subplot. It's the love triangle between Rose, Cosmo, and Mona, and that's a marriage love story. And then there's this teeny tiny little subplot that belongs to the grandpa, and he wants to get Cosmo to pay for Loretta's wedding. So let's look at the main plot line first, the courtship love story, the love triangle between Loretta, Johnny, and Ronnie. So when we're setting things up, we've got to set up whatever the reader needs to know about the character and whatever the reader needs to know about the plot. In Act 1 of Moonstruck, here's what we learn about the characters of the main storyline. We're introduced to Loretta and Johnny, and their personalities are established. Loretta's an accountant. She is practical. She's responsible. She leads with her head. Johnny is a big baby. He is not her equal at all. They're not the same. They're chalk and cheese, these two. In terms of the plot, Johnny proposes. His relationship with his mother is established, and it's revealed that his mother, who lives in Sicily, is sick. She's on her deathbed, in fact, and she's expected to die any day now. And it's also revealed that Johnny has a brother and that there's bad blood between Johnny and his brother, Ronnie. All right, so there you have it. You have all 3 characters of the love triangle, main storyline, are introduced in Act 1. Now, Ronnie's not on the screen yet, but we know he exists, so he's introduced. All of these issues, so they're opened in Act 1. In Act 4, they're closed. What do we have here? I'm just looking at my notes. So in Act 4, for character, whereas in the beginning of the story, Loretta led with her head, now she's in Act 4, she's leading with her heart. She does the less practical and the less responsible thing by agreeing to marry Ronnie. In terms of the plot, well, in Act 1, Johnny proposed. In Act 4, Johnny breaks off the engagement. In Act 1, Johnny's mother was on her deathbed. In Act 4, she has magically recovered. In Act 1, Johnny and Ronnie are having I was going to say they're having a fight, but there has been a long-standing feud between them, and they're not speaking at all. In Act 4, they resolve their differences and are now brothers again. So all of the elements of the love triangle are in the story by the end of Act 1. As I said, Ronnie's not on stage yet, but we know about him, and he comes on stage as soon as Act 2 begins. And the love triangle is fully established by midpoint because by then, Loretta and Ronnie have had sex, and Ronnie has invited Loretta to go see an opera with him. And we know that, this is not going to be a one-time thing. This is not just a one and done. It's not a wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. Ronnie wants to be there with Loretta. He wants a relationship with Loretta. And Loretta seems to want a relationship with him as well. Johnny now is the complication to their love story. All right. So that's the main plot line. Great. So, what do we know about the marriage love story, which is the subplot in Moonstruck? Well, here we go. In Act 1, Cosmo fears death. That's what we learn. In Act 2, we learn that Cosmo is having an affair and Rose knows about the affair. That's everything we need to know. There's nothing new that gets added to that storyline. That's all we need to know about this marriage love story subplot. In Act 3, Loretta catches Cosmo with Mona, who's his mistress, at the opera, but we have already seen Cosmo and Mona together in a restaurant. In Act 4, Rose confronts Cosmo about his fear of death and his affair with Mona, and she gets him to break off the relationship. She says, "That's it. Have I been a good wife to you?" He says, "Yes." She says, "Great. Well, Mrs. got to go. I'm your wife. Out she goes." And he agrees he's going to break it off. So everything about that love story is established in Acts 1 and Act 2, that he has a fear of death and he's having an affair, and Rose knows about the affair. Those are all the questions being posed. The questions are answered then, really in Act 4, in the climax of the whole movie, because this is a subplot. So it's not going to take up as much screen time as the main love triangle between Loretta, Ronnie, and Johnny. All right. Then we have Grandpa's storyline. The grandpa with the 5 or 6 or 7 dogs, whatever it is. This is my future. I have 2 now, and I have to be careful not to. As I saw the old man coming down the stairs with all the dogs, I thought, that could be me. I have to be careful. No more dogs. All right, so here we've got Grandpa. Right, they all live in one house. They're a big, happy Italian family. In Act 1, the old man hatches a plan to get Cosmo to pay for Loretta's wedding, because Cosmo has refused, because Loretta has already been married once. This would be her second marriage. And he doesn't like Johnny. In Act 4, again, in the climax of the whole movie, the old man confronts Cosmo about paying for the wedding, and he gets Cosmo to agree. So it's a teeny tiny little story, but there is a setup in Act 1 when we see the grandpa take his dogs for a walk, and he actually goes to a cemetery, and he and all his buddies are standing around a grave. It looks like they're there for a funeral, but they're actually having their little secret community meeting. And he says this is his problem. How is he going to get his son to pay for his granddaughter's wedding? Because it's honorable for Cosmo to pay for Loretta's wedding, and it's the right thing, and Cosmo needs to do it. That's the grandpa's object of desire, right? To get Cosmo to pay for the wedding. That is set up in Act 1. And the grandfather is he's always in the movie. He's never gone from the movie. But that question or that issue that has been opened at the beginning gets resolved in Act 4. Right? It's paid off in Act 4 when he comes down the stairs and he's finally mustered up the courage to have it out with his son. And this is the big climax of the story, but the grandfather's kind of not aware of all of the other stuff that has been going on. And he comes down the stairs and he says, "Son, this is the way it's going to be." Right? So that's the end of his little plot line. It's set up and it's paid off. All right. So, I mean, that's about it, really. There was nothing new after Act 2 for any of the 3 storylines in Moonstruck. Everything we needed to know about the 3 plots were in place by the midpoint shift, which is about halfway. As we get into the season, we're going to have more complex stories, I think. So, it was probably going to take me a little longer to sort of parse it and pull it all apart. But for now, that's kind of it. So, Melanie, this season you're talking about female protagonists.
All right, but before I go on to that, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So I was thinking about your topic as we ended last season and went into this season, and I really was curious to know, do you think that this applies to left brain stories as well, or the principle of nothing new after Act 2 applies to left brain mystery stories? Because I think, I don't think it will apply, but I was wondering what you thought, now that you've started the season. And I know it's a bit unfair after one episode, but I was just wondering what you thought about, do you think this could be genre specific?
I'm really glad you asked this because I have been wondering it myself. So I don't have a definite answer for you yet because I would need to study it to come up with anything definitive, but I have a theory, one of my many theories. So I'll share it for what it's worth. Okay. I suspect that there are an awful lot of left brain stories that do reveal new information much later than Act Two. However, I think that's lazy writing in a left brain story. And here's why I say that. Part of the game of a left brain story is that you give the reader everything that they need to know. You're upfront because you have to give the reader a fair chance to solve the puzzle. And if you as the writer, if you're holding back information and you don't reveal it until the last act, the denouement, when the whodunit is being revealed, and well, there's no way we could have solved it. We didn't have the information. Or even if you hold back the information until even the third act of a four-act story or the fourth act of a four-act story, it's not playing fair, in my opinion. I'm expecting that when I study this in left brain stories, I'm expecting that the authors who are really good at mysteries, I'll just use mysteries as an example because I know them better than spy stories. I expect that when I read the real master writers of mysteries, I'll discover that everything I needed to know to solve the puzzle, I knew by the middle. When I read newer writers or mysteries that maybe aren't so good, I'm expecting that there will be information that's withheld and that I couldn't possibly have solved it because I wasn't given the information I needed to solve it. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I'm really curious about it because I have a slightly different theory, I suppose, in that, especially around master detectives. And so it might just be a very niche subset, right, of left brain stories. I think that they have information that they don't reveal until right at the end, that it's something they know and that they've worked out, but it's part of the denouement. And there is no way that you could ever have known it, even though, because I think that people who write those stories at that higher level create the illusion that you have everything you need to know to solve the mystery. So that's my theory. So I think we have slightly different view on that. So it'd be really interesting to see as we go along if we can tease that out a little bit more.
So are you saying that you think that's the way it should be?
No, I think that's actually what happens. I think so in those the Agatha Christie's, the Anthony Horowitz of the world, the people who write extremely clever and very good mysteries and murder mysteries in particular. I think that's what they all do. So when I read Hawthorne stories or when I read Hercule Poirot, they get a piece of information or they have something right at the end that they reveal is it's like the keystone piece of information. So they haven't just worked out who did it, but they've worked out the how and the why as well. And I think that they only reveal that piece of information at the end. So anyway, that's my working theory, I suppose, on those particular types of stories. And part of why I'm really fascinated to see if we can work this out like this season, or if it comes up again in this season, or if there's other stories as well that do reveal more information. And I'm really interested if we start this season off thinking, well, it might be lazy writing if you do introduce stuff after Act 2, and if we go through this season and see what actually happens and does that hold water.
Well, as you're speaking, I'm reading a Hawthorne novel now, Anthony Horowitz, and the form of it is very much like Murder on the Orient Express. Okay, so the murder takes place, and then there's chapter after chapter where each of the possible suspects is interviewed. So it's an interview after interview after interview, and I suspect that the interviews won't be finished until Well, let me put it to you this way. I suspect that it's not a 4-act structure story.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's probably a 3-act structure story, with the second act
Mm-hmm.
being all the gathering of clues
Yeah.
and the interrogation of suspects.
Right.
And I
Okay.
don't think that will be concluded until like the 75% mark. So act 2 then of a 3-act structure.
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, we're still gathering clues.
That's the form. So that's
Right?
where it comes back to form, right? That form of
Yeah.
1,
This
2,
is an
3.
interesting
Yeah.
line of inquiry.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious now because I don't know. I mean, I shared to you what my thought
Yeah.
was about this whole book, and you didn't respond. So I'm
I
like,
didn't.
she's not going to give away the ending.
Nope.
She's just not saying anything. I'm curious to know. I'm nearing the end of the interviews now.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious to see where it goes. Anyway, I won't say anything because I don't want to spoil the book for anybody. But other than to say, I love Anthony Horowitz. I think he's a great writer. His books read themselves. That's how smooth his writing is. It's just a joy. You don't even notice the words on the page. You're just into the story. But it is a really good question that you ask, and I don't know what the answer is. But I think that if you're going to write a left brain story and be fair about it,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to give the reader everything that they need in order to solve the puzzle themselves. But your puzzle is so good they can't figure it out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All
right?
right.
And one of the things that Horowitz does is he overloads you with details.
Yes.
So you can't see the forest for the trees, right? There's just so many details that you lose unless you're going to sit there with a pen and paper. But I mean, that's not any fun. You know,
No.
that's not how people read a novel.
Not the
right?
first time. It's not fun. The second time.
Well, you and I would sit down with a pen and paper if we wanted to analyze the book.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's not how readers approach a novel. They don't analyze the novel. They are reading the novel for enjoyment and entertainment.
Yeah.
They're not studying the novel with a pen and paper. So anyway, that's all I have to say about that right now.
All right. Okay, good. We'll see how that plays out, right? That's exciting. That's good. It's fun. All right. Female protagonists. All right. Well, this season, as we've mentioned, I'm looking at female characters and female protagonists in particular. Now, I chose this topic after watching Lady Bird in season 8. And if you want to understand a bit more about that, please go back and listen to that episode. And also because of something I recently read in a craft book or a writing craft book. But I won't go into that now. I'll tell you a bit more about that next week. So that's my cliffhanger for this week. All right. So both of these things really got me thinking about female characters in stories and how they hold up a mirror to our reality, as well as project what our reality could be. Now, this season, I really want to look at the differences between female representation in the past and the present, but I'm also curious about how women are written, what male writers get wrong about female characters, and what assumptions writers make about them. And one specific area that I'm interested in is how women fight physically and use weapons differently from men because of their anatomical differences. Now, I've picked one movie in particular this season to talk about this, so stay tuned. But the other thing is that season 10 is going to be a very wide-ranging one for me, so I'm not sure what topic I'll be talking about every week, but it will really be centred around that female protagonist or female characters if we don't have a female protagonist. Now, Moonstruck is a romance, so there are some pretty standard female archetypes in it. Now, what is an archetype? And I just want to get this out there because I think it's really important to understand what an archetype is. So an archetype is a character or a series of characters that are based on a set of characteristics or qualities that make them identifiable and recognizable to readers or viewers. Archetypes are not stereotypes. Archetypes function as literary devices for complex character development, while stereotypes are limiting and based mainly on negative character traits. Now, the female characters, or the main female characters in Moonstruck, are Loretta, Rose, who is Loretta's mother, Rita, who is Loretta's aunt, and Mona, who's Cosmo's mistress. Now, they all have romantic roles in the movie, and that's not surprising. And they also all represent 4 different types of romantic relationships. Now, I'll go through each of the archetypes for each character in order from simplest to the most complex. All right, so we'll start with Mona because she, I think, is the most simple. Now, I actually believe that her character is based on a stereotype, and it's the mistress stereotype. Her clothing is loud and showy, her conversation is shallow, and she hangs off Cosmo's every word. And she's really there to kind of boost his ego because he's obviously scared of dying, and she pumps him up. Now, in terms of female characters, she is the least developed, but she is a foil. So she is a direct contrast to the other, more developed female characters in the story, especially Rose and Loretta. And as an example, Mona is shallow where Rose is deep, and Mona is the mistress, whereas Loretta breaks with Johnny and gets engaged to Ronnie by the end. So she sort of reflects both of them and bounces off and highlights a lot of their strengths and their differences. Now, using stereotypical characters is an interesting technique in this movie, but it's also very common in a lot of books and other movies as well. Now, in this instance, it works well in Moonstruck because there are complex and developed characters. And I'd also argue to some point that I think Johnny and Ronnie are probably more stereotypical than they are really well-developed types of characters. So they're not very complex characters in my view, and they border on being stereotypical. Now, Rita is a different character. She's not a complete character in the same way that Loretta and Rose are, but she is more developed than Mona. Now, Rita and Raymond, and Raymond's Rita's husband, they sort of act as the elders or the sage archetypes. They don't have character arcs themselves, but they are there to help others, to show love and to care for the other characters. Now, Rita believes that news of an impending marriage is a joyous thing, and she constantly reminds Loretta about all the things she has to organise to make the wedding happen. Rita is optimistic about marriage because she is in a happy and romantic relationship with Raymond. And then there's Rose. Now, she is deeper than Mona and Rita, and she is the queen. Rose is the matriarch of the family, and she has the power of a ruler. Her arc in Moonstruck is centered around learning how to exert her power to keep her kingdom safe. And her kingdom is the family, and it comes under threat because Cosmo has an affair. So Rose starts the movie as suspicious and concerned about her husband's behaviour, and she ends the movie by telling Cosmo to stop his affair. So that is her learning to exert her power as the queen. But the other interesting thing is that she is also an older version of Loretta. Now, this makes sense, right? Archetypes have evolutions. The maiden, after her ordeal, transitions into marriage and family, which is the domain of the queen. And I just want to point out that this doesn't have to be literal. This is very symbolic when we're using archetypes, and it gives you a framework for character development. Now, the queen takes on the role of a mentor for the next generation of maidens because the queen has been where the maiden currently is. Now, the queen is the defender of the family and her kingdom, as I've mentioned, but once she is married, she will remain devoted and loyal to her husband, even if he humiliates her. The queen, as an archetype, is the pinnacle of feminine leadership. So, like all archetypes, the queen has negative characteristics as well. So she can be jealous, she can be hostile and impatient. And if these characteristics were left unchecked, the queen can transform into a tyrannical or ruthless leader. Now, it's interesting because Rose does display some of those characteristics. She threatens her father-in-law, an old man, with a beating if he feeds the food that she's made to his dogs. And she does consider the idea of going home with Perry when she's walking home with him because she is jealous of Mona and she is angry at Cosmo. Rose's arc occurs also in parallel to Loretta's. At the start of the movie, Rose tells her daughter not to marry someone she loves because it's easy to get hurt by romantic partners. Now, at this point, Rose suspects her husband of having an affair and doesn't want Loretta to make the same mistake that she believes that she's made. By the end of the movie, Rose has exerted her authority as Cosmo's wife and queen of the family, and this allows her then to celebrate Loretta's engagement to Ronnie. Now, as I was researching the Queen this week, I was really struck by how true to the archetype Rose is. And this is the first time I've really understood that and understood how to use archetypes to develop character and how they help you as you're writing keep, develop and use characteristics that are recognizable to viewers and readers. Now, the characteristics of the Queen provided a basis for Rose's complex and interesting character. And by keeping within the bounds of the archetype, the writers have provided her character with a possible explanation of why she stays with Cosmo. Loyalty is important to her, and so is keeping her family together. Now, I did give some thought as to whether this archetype is still relevant to females today, because I thought, well, wouldn't a strong woman walk away from an unfaithful man? And I think she would. But I also think that there are plenty examples of queens in the world today. And if you've watched the Netflix series Beckham, you will know exactly what I mean. And there's plenty of other examples of that around the world as well. So that's really fascinating, right? So I do think it's relevant. I do think there are queens around the world that we see in modern day examples, but there are also other options. So women don't have to remain as queens, but there are still a lot out there. Anyway, finally, we have Loretta as the maiden. Now, the maiden is about the character coming into their power. Now, Loretta isn't a young woman. She is a widow who married for love, but considers herself unlucky because her first husband died in an accident. Now, Loretta is living in fear, and it's her fear of repeating the past that has caused her to settle for a man like Johnny. She has felt the power of passion and romantic love, but after the traumatic events of her past, she has suppressed it. Now, the interesting thing is that the maiden remains helpless and powerless while she is captive. But once she is free, she becomes a different character. So the maiden arc is also about sexual awakening. Now, Loretta's fear is keeping her captive, and as much as I hate to say this, when she meets Ronnie and they go to the bed, she becomes a different person. We see her physically transform from sensible, practical Loretta into sexy, in love Loretta. And it's a physical transformation as well as an internal transformation. The interesting point about Loretta's arc is that it's not a coming of age for her. She has already been in love. But Moonstruck is about rediscovering who she is after the trauma of losing her first husband. Now, although Loretta's struggle is an internal one, it's basically summarised by, does she remain sensible or does she fall in love? And her dilemma is represented in the physical world by Johnny and Ronnie. So when Loretta makes her choice, she does so with her eyes wide open because of her father's affair with Mona and her knowledge of that affair. And also she has witnessed her mother's demand that Cosmo stops seeing Mona. So she has seen their arc as well, and it allows her, I think, and gives her the final freedom to go ahead and accept Ronnie's proposal. Now, despite the archaic names of these stereotypes, I do believe that they are relevant for female characters today. And as I mentioned in our Ladybird episode, most of the women I know aren't on the hero's journey. They are on the journey of coming into and accepting their power at all stages of life. So this has been really fascinating this week. And I actually, to be honest, I have come to the conclusion I didn't think I would come to just by looking at Moonstruck and looking at the archetypes that fit in this story. Anyway, so I'm excited. I'm excited that I was wrong. I'm excited I found something new, and I'm learning as I'm really learning as it's episode 1 as we go for this season. So it's setting up something really good. Hopefully it'll pay off later, but we'll see. All right, Valerie, what is the action step for this week?
Well, just before I get to the action step, I started this episode by saying, well, it was the 1980s movies, and we've discovered that they don't necessarily age very well, and I was nervous about what I might find. Well, excuse me, Loretta is only 37, and they are presenting her as though she's gone to seed, right? Like, what the heck, right? First of all, it's Cher, hello, but they have her at 37 with the gray hair, and she's dressing frumpy, and her hair is just up, whatever. I'm like, 37? Come on. Oi, with the poodles already. I mean, this is where the 80s mentality has not translated at all. I heard on an interview the other day that 70 is the new 50, and that is what I'm going with.
Okay, that's good. Let's aspire to do that.
All right. Action step. All right, here's what I want you to do. Take a close look at each of the plot lines in your story and make sure that everything the reader needs to know about them and everything that the reader needs to know about your characters are in your book. You've got them woven into your manuscript by the 50% point. And if you want a fun exercise to do, grab a novel from your bookshelf, open it up to the middle, and put a Post-it note there just to mark the page. And then read the book and note the characters and the plots and watch how, in the books that have stood the test of time anyway, everything you need to know has been woven into the narrative by the midpoint, by around the halfway mark of the story. I started doing this with movies years ago. I'm fascinated by it. Now I do it with books. It's really interesting. The modern books, the ones that are being written and published now, as opposed to something that was 50 or 60 or 100 years ago, this is what I'm talking about. That midpoint of the story is really important. Everything that the reader needs to know has to be there by the 50% point. And I'm saying this with the caveat that I'm not sure if it's true with Left Brain Stories yet.
So you've got an each way bet, really. All right, that wraps it up for this week. Join us again next week when we discuss Zero Dark 30. To support the show, please leave us a rating and review and tell your writer friends about us. For access to writing templates and worksheets and more than 70 hours of training, subscribe to Valerie's Inner Circle by visiting valeriefrancis.ca/inner circle and follow her on X, Instagram and Threads at Valerie_Francis. She also has a YouTube channel, so be sure to check that out at youtube.com/@ValerieFrancis. And if you'd like to get my tips about books to help you read like a writer, visit me on Facebook, Instagram and Threads at Melanie Hill Author, or find out more about me at melaniehill.com.au. And remember, story theory doesn't have to be difficult. It's a tool to help you write more, not less. So take it one step at a time and have fun.